Hey, it's me again, Phase North, here with another video. This time it is a AMA that Marshall had with XDC. But before we move on to the video, I would like to thank you, each and one of you, for subscribing. And for those who sent me tips, thank you very much. God bless. I am grateful for those tips. And for those who wish to join me on Patreon, you can find the details in the description. And if you wish to send me a tip and support the channel, you can send from your WebAuth wallet to SUNSEEKER. Bitcoin, Ether, XPR, XRP, all welcomed. So from here on, I'm going to play you a AMA with Marshall, which was being held by XDC Community. And this was held in April of 2023. Enjoy, get yourself a tea, a coffee, and relax. Enjoy. God bless.
All right, I say we just go ahead and get going here, and if people join, then they can listen back if they want to. So thank everybody for joining us today. So my name is John McBee, and I'm here with XDC Community. XDC Community is a organization that's really focused on developer engagement on the XDC network and making sure that developers who come to the network have what they need to be successful. And one of the things we like to do is, as projects integrate with XDC network or vice versa, we like to have AMAs or conversations with people from those projects so that we can introduce ourselves to their community and introduce them to the XDC community. And so today we have Marshall Hayner from MetalX. Marshall, if you want to say hi.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me, John. Really excited to be here today and learn more about XDC with the community and talk about everything that you guys are building. It's really exciting.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. I appreciate you taking the time. I thought maybe a good place to start would be to have you kind of give us an overview or lay of the land of Metallicus and Proton and how they fit together, what the different entities are, just so people from the XTC community have some idea of how all the pieces kind of fit together.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is crypto and fintech. I've been involved for a very long time in this space. Some of you might know me. I built my first crypto startup in 2012 in the early days when I was just getting started. It was called QuickCoin. And from there, from there, I got involved with a company called Stellar, and I helped launch the Stellar network while I was getting involved in DogeCoin, which came around in December of 2013. And subsequently, that's where I met my co-founder and our CTO, Glenn Marion. We started MetalX in 2016, and we've been going ever since then. And our vision is to build a global digital asset banking network. And what that means is what it sounds like, the actual bank, international bank, but also the blockchain and all the technology built around that, from payments, lending, trading, everything you'd expect to do in DeFi and traditional finance and more, connected to the blockchain. And we built a whole ecosystem around MetalX, we call the Metal ecosystem. Part of that is a crypto banking application that's live in the US and EU called MetalPay. You can check that out at metalpay.com. And then we have like kind of a blockchain network, a layer 1 and layer 0 blockchain called Proton and Metal blockchain respectively. And then we built all types of dApps and products around that. Probably what we'll be talking about today is the Proton DEX, which is a crypto exchange. It's kind of like a fully featured spot exchange, but it's built completely in a decentralized manner on the Proton network. And then we've also built a decentralized stablecoin, which you can check out on Proton, as well as a DeFi lending platform that's compliant with rules and regs, with digital identity, but also supports multi-chain assets. A lot of stuff going on here, but I'm sure we can dig into it.
Yeah, no, that is a lot, but you've been here from the start, so it makes sense we'd have a lot to cover. So Metallicus is the layer zero, is that right? That's what I understand.
Yeah, so there's two blockchains. There's the Proton blockchain, that's the layer one. That's where we do all of our DeFi stuff, trading and payments and so forth and lending. And then the layer zero, which is a newer concept, is called Metal blockchain. And the idea is that we want people to be able we were approached by many institutions that wanted to use Proton, but they wanted their own version of it, their own flavor of it, like a bank, for example. Or perhaps they wanted their own version of Ethereum that was proof of stake, but they wanted it to be kind of their own model. And in almost every case, when we were talking to these banks and fintechs and payment institutions, they wanted to be able to be connected to Bitcoin and Ethereum and other blockchains, but they didn't want to have the risk of the so-called Oracle, the DeFi bridges that kept getting hacked.
Yep.
So we built the Metal blockchain, layer zero. And what we do is we can spin up these, we call them virtualized chains. So you can have the AVM or the Antelope virtual machine or the Ethereum virtual machine, or even just a pure fork of Bitcoin running in a proof of stake environment, and it can talk to other virtualized wrap chains. So we, for example, have Bitcoin, Ethereum, DogeCoin, XDC. These are custody wrapped assets on the layer one, but soon we'll expand those to a layer zero, where you'll have a Bitcoin with smart contracts, for example, and they can talk to each other over a trustless bridge where you don't need to have any sort of oracles or wrapping. When it comes to unwrapping those assets and bringing them back to mainnet, just like Proton, it's a custodied process, and into the future, that custody could also become more decentralized too.
Okay, interesting. So Metal blockchain's layer zero. Proton is one layer one that's built as a subchain of Metal blockchain. And you're saying you can also have kind of bespoke subchains that get spun up based on the requirements of the customer. And eventually, like you're saying, you could actually spin up a Bitcoin and XDC as a subchain off of Metal blockchain. All of these subchains can communicate to each other, which is really interesting. And for now, Proton is the banking subchain for your tech stack. And so that's where all the different DeFi apps, the integration with bank infrastructure, where all that's going to live.
Exactly. So we ended up, when we built Proton, we looked at everything. We initially were very excited about building things in kind of the Ethereum land, and there were so many problems with the EVM from miner extracted value, MEV indexes, where people are front running with higher fees and bots and things like that, which has become a whole economy now with flash bots and everything. And then there was other issues. We wanted to have fast and feeless, and we wanted to have human readable names. And so we started looking at EOS.io at Antelope, and we found everything that we needed, but there were some issues with the way that EOS was initially implemented. So you'd show up to the platform, and it was kind of confusing and tricky, more so than, for example, using Bitcoin or something. So we modified all of that. We built a DAO around it, and we made it really very fast and efficient. One of the things that that happened with that platform is it kind of took on a life of its own with the community, with the EOS Network Foundation, and they started to build inter-blockchain communication and EVM into Antelope. And that they've made a ton of progress. It's really great. We started looking at it and said, you know what? If the goal here is to get Proton to faster finality, at the current time, at present day, it's 180 seconds. We think that we might have a better way to get it down there. So we started looking at some of the other blockchains and technology. How did, for example, Avalanche get down to a half second? And we came up with the idea of forking Avalanche and rewriting all of the Antelope code into Golang, which we've successfully done now. We're in kind of the testing phase. And in doing that, we lowered the contract execution time from about 450 milliseconds to, we're not exactly sure how fast it is because it's faster than the benchmark tool, but it's under 100 milliseconds. So we're trying to find out how fast that is, but I think it is actually one of the fastest chains in the world because of on execution time. And then we lowered the time to finality with Snowman protocol to a half second. And we kind of came to the conclusion that maybe we thought that maybe people wouldn't want necessarily to bring EVM code inside of EOS or Proton, that in most cases they want to either build their own chain or they want to stay on Ethereum proper. In our research, that's what we found.
Mhm.
So we came up with this idea of, instead of trying to cram the EVM into Antelope, let's make these parallel chains that can talk to each other. And now Antelope has launched EVM on their platform. They have IBC. I think it's all very powerful, but when it came to these larger institutions, they didn't necessarily want to create their own delegated node, network. They wanted to just be able to spin up quickly and be secure. And then also when it came to kind of like Ethereum or Bitcoin, or in this case, Avalanche, there were certain things that weren't really fine-tuned for what they wanted to do. The idea that 51% of the network is enough to take it over is still pretty scary. So fine-tuning that above 80% and doing other things that were focused on the financial layer, traditional TradFi coming in and looking at this like, okay, we can talk to a public layer, but we still kind of have our own private blockchain running on top of it. And that's where we got a lot of traction. We started to see a lot of success, and everything that we've built with Proton at some point will be able to be ported by other chains and things like that. So you could have a Proton exchange on a Bank of America chain or a Citi blockchain or something like that on Metal blockchain, and that can talk to Bitcoin, can talk to DogeCoin and Ethereum, and ultimately can talk to other banks, is the idea as well.
Interesting. All right, so you're building a network of networks effectively. So I just wanted to ask some clarifying questions, because I've read the white papers for Metal blockchain and for Proton blockchain. Just want to make sure I understand. So is it correct to say that Proton was initially a fork of EOS.io? And
That's right.
Okay. And you made improvements to it, and so it's no longer, I'd say, backwards compatible, because you've introduced improvements to EOS.io that fit the needs of your customers. And you wanted it to have faster settlement time, make it more scalable. And so you've now forked Avalanche and fine-tuned Avalanche. Is that tech stack going to replace the consensus or the protocol that makes up Proton right now?
Yeah, exactly. So right now it is still kind of compatible, right? Like we can upgrade to the latest version of Leap and everything like that. We've changed a lot of the core system smart contracts, the way the resources are handled. But a lot of things right now in the DPoS environment for Proton are still compatible. When we make that shift and we go from DPoS to Snowman consent proof of stake, it's going to be very different. So there still will be this delegated model where 21 BPs are producing at any given time. But instead, it's going to become a lot easier. So in the past, in Antelope, it's hard to become a block producer, right? You have to have access to a data center. You have to have access to a lot of hardware and resources. It's not quite like being a Bitcoin miner, but you're also not going to do it out of your home, right? But with Snowman, with Avalanche, and with Metal, you could run you could be a validator on your laptop. You might not want to be, but you could. And that's how low the technical requirements are. And essentially a home internet connection, ISP, could also work, although you probably want to have something a little more stable, but that's the difference. And so now anyone can become a block producer when we switch to Antelope Virtual Machine on Metal blockchain. Everything's going to be a lot faster, infinitely faster, about like 1,000% faster in terms of executing. The finality is going to be a lot faster. But at that point, when we switch to AVM on Metal, that's when it's no longer backwards compatible, right? Because it's a completely different language. Upgrading it and everything is, we'd have to rewrite every upgrade and write our own custom code. But that's where it starts to really diverge. And there are some things that we're doing with Metal as well, with the validators around compliance and the ability for banks to basically be able to like whitelist out OFAC countries and things like that. There's a lot of stuff we're doing there as well that may not be backwards compatible. But we've taken the open source technology, recognizing the work of Dan Larimer, Eamon Gunsier, and saying, this is really good stuff, right? We're going to fine tune it for a more specific use case. And when it came to Antelope, we thought it would make sense that other banks and institutions would want to run a lot of similar type applications like loan and DEX and things like that and use the DID, but they may not want to do it completely under our environment. So that was kind of the vision. And so far it's been proving to be really right. We've made a ton of traction, and we're getting ready to launch the AVM. The AVM, there's no guarantee. This is a question we got asked a lot. You know, how do people switch over? Do you have the authority to tell people to switch over? And we don't really. We're just going to push this thing out. And if people like it, they're going to migrate. And if not, then they won't. And we'll support it, and we'll see what happens. And I think that the nice part about this, the thing that's really cool about it, is that it will really increase the decentralization of Proton. Because once, when it was very difficult to become a block producer, now becoming a validator, anyone can do it. And I've seen the difference between the two blockchains, where you have people from all over crypto Twitter, from our community, spinning up validators and doing it really simply. And so I think that's something that was kind of, you know, if you look back to Bitcoin in 2009, 2010, there was a time where you could actually mine at home, like in the first year or so, first couple of years. And now that's obviously, that dream is dead. Even with like proof, even with, you know, if you were, you know, in the days when you could mine Ethereum, right? Or like, let's use like Litecoin, for example, you're still probably not doing that at home, right? The ability to participate, and it's not about necessarily about like your setup, your access to energy and things like that. It's more about what you contribute to the network, the open source code that you write, the, you know, meme, everything down to the memes you make and the content that you tweet, could rise you up as a validator. So right now in Proton, we have about, you know, 50 block producers or so. I'd love to see 5,000. And I think that can happen, you know, in the switch to Metal.
Interesting. Yeah, I was going to say, it sounds like you've nailed accessibility. That's a big problem with a lot of chains, is how do you actually make decentralization real through accessibility to, you know, in this case, the validators. And so I was reading on the white paper how you said you have to basically apply to become a block processor. So it sounds like that application was really to ensure that the people were running on hardware that would actually be able to contribute to the validation of blocks and wouldn't, say, have latency issues with communication. So this upgrade makes all that simpler. Is there still going to be an application process to become a block producer?
Interestingly enough, that goes away. So you could still validate the blocks. We are going to ask that those that participate in Proton still register in some form, because the idea with Proton being like a payments blockchain, we want people to know who the block producers are. We want those block producers to be able to contribute back. If you go to protonscan.io, you can see the links to all the block producers' websites, their socials, different things like that. And so as we develop Proton out, we still want that information to be out there, but it won't be necessary. So in the future, you would be able to have block producers that could spring up, you know, without information. We're still going to push for that, but right now it's whitelisted, so you can't even become a block producer unless you go through the DAO. In the future, you wouldn't need to, and that's something we could definitely modify. You know, as we're building this out, we're also about to launch our DAO dashboard where we can make these community decisions, and maybe the community decides that they do or don't want that, and you know, that's something MetalX as the core dev can try to implement. Some of the things that we do want to keep are the compliance tooling, right? For decentralized identity, for consumers, for business, and then ultimately the ability for businesses to be compliant in the jurisdictions that they're in. So you're not, for example, interacting with North Korea or something like that, whether it's getting data from nodes or, you know, receiving transaction or so forth, or everything down to even what came up with the White House in the US announced recently that there are issues with DeFi. How do you know you're not interacting with North Korea? I keep picking on North Korea, but whatever. It's a good example because they use that example. And I think that's where a lot of the DeFi is going. You know, it's really cool to have XDC listed because I think there's some shared values and kind of vision between chains about, you know, about how we can interact with financial institutions. I hear a lot ISO 222 brought up about Proton and about XDC. It's very cool to see too. There's definitely a community in crypto that wants to see this. And there are certain projects and certain coins that come up around this thesis. And XDC is one of those that we hear a lot.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a lot of more compatibility with the existing financial infrastructure and working with, in our case, trade finance and finding ways to improve efficiencies and work with back office to reduce risk and all these things. I agree. It's more working with traditional finance than trying to replace it. I wanted to ask another question. Sorry, this is all really interesting. I think this is extremely cool, your technology stack and what you're doing. So I know that right now, one of the incentives to be a validator is the inflationary aspect of your tokenomics, where 4% of, I think, circulating supply gets allocated, I think, every day, a portion of it. And 1% of that goes to validators. As the number of validators goes up, the amount will diminish, right? And so what do you think it will incentivize the 5,000 plus validators to come be validators on the network if that financial incentive kind of goes down over time?
So the way that it works is it tapers off, and so it becomes less and less as you come further down the stack. So you could have, people as number, I don't know, when you get above like 40 or 50, it stops being kind of relevant. At that point, the block producer is really investing into the network, right? So they're saying, well, hey, I'm going to invest into this network because I want to validate block, or I want to produce blocks, I want to be a part of it, and hopefully someday I can be a big miner, big earner, right? The difference is that in the Bitcoin world, the biggest miners, they don't care about Bitcoin. Hate to say it, but they don't, right? They don't care at all. They only care about ROI, and yeah, they like Bitcoin in the sense that it's part of their industry and what they're doing. And I don't want to say they don't care about Bitcoin. They might, but they're not as passionate as, say, someone building something on Bitcoin or somebody maybe evangelizing in Bitcoin. The Bitcoin miner's interest is usually more purely financial, right? Not really thinking so much about, the state of banking or central banks or whatever. It's, what's the mining difficulty? Am I going to ROI right now? How should we trade out our mining profits? And so in the kind of Proton world, in the EOS world, there's definitely more competition to say, how do we support as the number one block producer? So into the future, you'll definitely have a fight. You always have a fight for the top 21, because in DPoS, you're going to have the top 21 are those that can actually produce blocks, but it's also those that can vote on core changes. So when you have huge changes to the blockchain, change to inflation, change to the core code upgrades, things like that, you're going to need 15 out of 21 of the active block producers. So being part of that 21 is also being really in control of the future of the network, and people want to fight for that. So I think when the cap expands and we switch to AVM, if it's successful and we have block producers coming over and dApps coming over, then I think what'll happen is you'll see a huge explosion of validators because it's so much easier to become a validator. I think what'll happen is where it was once 50, and it'll probably won't be 5,000 overnight. It'll probably be like several hundred. It'll be like 200-300 or something like that overnight, right? And then at that point, to be that top 10%, that top 7% or whatever, that's going to be the bar of competition is going to be a lot higher, right? So now you have people that are going to come in that are going to do more, that are going to create more content, they're going to build more apps, they're going to do more business development, bring more people in, and fighting for that top 21 is going to become more and more difficult. When you only have like 50 or so, it's like flipping a coin, right? You could flip a coin and land in the top 21. So right now, these are the early good days of Proton, and not that the future is bad days, but in terms of competition, these are the early easy days, right? Where it's like I could flip a coin, I could land in the top 21. In the future, you're going to have to really fight for it, and I think that that's really cool because there are a lot of people and entities that want to do this, but then they realize the technical hurdles and they say, oh, Well, I don't have a data center. I don't have all these things, right? And it depends on where you are in the world, but you know, in the US, the data center and all the access, even if you did have access to it, could be $1,000 a month, could be $2,000 a month. Are you ready to kind of put that in if you have access to it? So it narrows down the pool like very much. When the pool goes up and you have hundreds or thousands, competition increases. And also in terms of the inflation that's at 4%, we can change that, right? So the 15 out of 21, again, can change that and vote to say, hey, lessen that or increase that. And if that changes, if you know the AVM changes the way that we think about rewards for validators and block producers, then maybe we all vote to change that. To if it you know if we need less rewards or if we need more rewards. But this is kind of one of those cool experiments of blockchain where as we get deeper into it, we'll kind of understand, you know, the stakers, the block producers, everyone will understand what are the right incentives, right?
Yep.
I think fighting for the top 21 is really cool, and I love that we're going to move from like 500 or 50 to like 500 or 5,000, because when the competition really increases, that's when people on the outside say, "Oh, I want to do that. I want to get involved in that." And there was definitely a time, you know, there was a time when everything was very exciting in the end of 2021. All the markets were ripping, but the block producers were doing really, really well. And now, obviously, just like anything, you know, it's a lot tougher than it was. But I can definitely see a future in which that becomes more equitable, becomes, you know, more fair for people to jump in. And I'd love to see less technical, more marketing and YouTube and TikTok influence type people coming in as well, because I think that that's something that's missing, and it'd be great to see some VPs in that area as well.
That's cool. Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. I love the idea of the main incentive for becoming a validator or a block producer being that you actually care about the success of the network and you want to be in a position to make the right decisions for the network. I think a lot of chains, proof of work, proof of stake, the block producers end up being the early adopters, right? Who happen to get enough coins to stake or have early enough to make money to buy the right mining hardware. And they don't always have the right motivations for the chain itself. Like you said, they're more focused on ROI than on sustainability of the chain. So this is cool. I really like hearing this. What was I going to ask next? I was going to say something along the lines of, um, oh, there's a couple. So topics I want to talk about. There's no fees for transactions. I want to talk about the notion of identity and how it's kind of a first-class citizen on Proton Network. I had another question about validators, but I think that we've covered that pretty thoroughly, so we'll drop that. So let me ask about fees. Typically, transaction fees are used as a mechanism to deter attacks against the network. And I know that you or Proton doesn't actually have transaction fees, right? But you have this idea of resources. Could you kind of describe what resources are, how you can protect your network without having transaction fees?
Absolutely, yeah. So it's a little bit of a misnomer, right? So there Proton functions like it doesn't have fees, but there is a resource model and there are technically fees. But in a UTXO blockchain model, we're used to paying a fee per transaction. So like a postage stamp. Even if it's really low, even if it's a fraction of a penny, right? It's like Stellar or Ripple or something, it's very low, but there's still some XDC, I think, has a TX fee, but it's very low. uh, in the case of Proton, in the case of, we'll go to Antelope for a second, there's the model of you have three different types of resources. So it's broken down, and it's really for a very advanced type of smart contract. So you have RAM, net, and CPU. CPU is the clock cycles. That's how much, processing power the smart contract's going to consume. Like how complex is it? Like, is it crunching very intense math, or is it doing something very simple? Um, uh, RAM is the basically amount of memory that it needs. Are you trying to host little images? Are you trying to store, big tables in the blockchain, so you can store this data? RAM is required, and then net is the bandwidth. So that's the amount of basically bandwidth that it's using, of the node, or of the block producer. So basically, you have these three different areas, and contracts can consume different things, right? So in the past, we would just lump it all into one category, right? It's just ETH gas, it's just gas, right? And that has made that was one of the things that drove us towards Antelope was, okay, this is really cool because we've gotten rid of the per transaction gas fee and now it's a resource fee, right? So you would basically just go buy more RAM if you ran out. But the amount of RAM that's required to make, I don't know, like 10,000 transactions is like pennies, right?
Yeah.
So that's really cool. And one of the things so in the typical EOS model, you'd have to come in and either buy some RAM or stake some EOS, which again kind of creates the conundrum of if you don't have it, then how do you get started? And that's the problem with a lot of crypto wallets, as you know, people will show up and like, let's use like Ethereum and MetaMask for an example, right? I send you some USDC in your MetaMask wallet, and then you're like, I'm going to send this into MetalPay or Coinbase or whatever, right? And it's like, wrong. You need some ETH first, right? So it's like, oh, okay, I'll get some ETH. So this is like the noob's first time crypto journey. Like, wow, this is all very, I did the seed phrase. They sent me the stable coin, and now I need some other coin to get, which I guess makes sense, but it's very complex for your non-IT, non-developer, non-technical person, right? The apps are getting better, but it still requires some hand-holding, right? So usually someone doing this for the first time has a friend who's deeper in crypto, they're a family member, they'll help them out, right? Hopefully it's not some guy on Telegram, scamming you. Don't ask for help on Telegram, you will be scammed, or Twitter. But yeah, it's a close personal friend, family friend, whatever. And so now you're getting it off there. So that was the confusing part, I thought, for a lot of first-time crypto users was, if I get some USDC, if I get some XMD or USDP, USDT, whatever stable coin, I want to be able to send it on to the next person, to an app, and I don't want to have to think about it too much. So we came up with this idea in Proton. We came up with the concept of the consortium, which is like a decentralized autonomous organization, a DAO. And the consortium is comprised of several, initially it was just founding BPs, and now it's kind of shuffled around, where they either just kind of apply and say, hey, I want to join the consortium, and then we put it to a vote, or a consortium member, in some cases after some period of time, will step down and or invite, propose a new consortium member to join. Consortium is always like kept at an odd number, and it's a fraction of the active BPs. And the idea of the consortium is to kind of oversee the network. So whether we're doing core upgrades, we'll help organize that, we'll help inform the other BPs of upgrades that we're making, decisions around RAM, governance, all different types of things. Those can be organized by the consortium and then proposed to BPs. Also, as we just created a kind of like a war chest fund for DApp development and marketing and infrastructure recently. And that's something that the consortium oversees through multisig. So, and a lot of blockchains, I'm pretty sure XDC has this, right? You can apply to like the DAO to get funding and things like that. Same thing in Proton, the consortium. The consortium also can dole out these payments. We started with something called WPS, or Worker Proposal System, which we've since modified with this war chest grant that we've added. But yeah, the idea is that can be granted out. So right now you have the WebAuth Wallet, which was granted resources. And I think that, I'm not sure if we've done this yet, but we're in the process of granting resources to Anchor Wallet. I'm not sure if that's already implemented, but basically wallets can show up to Proton. You could build an open source wallet for Proton, and you could say, hey, I'm a new wallet in Proton. I'd like to get a grant for resources. And the resources are so cheap that a grant from the consortium might only cost a fraction of a penny or pennies per user or something like that, depending upon how much RAM you're giving them. And it really costs nothing. So it's a grant to that wallet and then gives them, a year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever of free fees for their users. That works. One of the ways that we can also, that we make that possible is that, people have asked us too about WebAuth Wallet, for example. Why are you asking for my email, right? Well, we're not actually signing you up for an account. That's our method of simply preventing the so-called faucet of RAM from being abused. So the early crypto people might remember in in the early days, there's actually faucets for Bitcoin where you get 1 to 3 Bitcoins would just shoot out like real Bitcoin. You just put in your email address or solve a little CAPTCHA code or something. Those are obviously long gone, but same kind of concept with Proton usernames. They do actually cost some fees to create. But if you were a wallet that was granted those fees, then it's very minimal for your users. And that's one way that we've asked that wallets kind of prevent the spam, is just some sort of limiting mechanism that makes it harder for someone to spin up 1,000 accounts, in 10 minutes or something.
Makes sense. Okay. Let me recap, because that was a lot of information. So fees exist, but they're typically covered by the DApp operator, and the fees are extremely small, similar with XDC Network, and they're typically, or they can be covered by a grant from the consortium, the Proton Consortium. I was reading, I think that the Proton Consortium has a war chest of around $3 million. Is that mainly to be allocated to projects looking to build on the network, or is it also being allocated for infrastructure work, updates to the consensus? I'm sure you guys are doing a ton of work right now, trying to prepare for the Avalanche port, it sounds like. Who pays for that work? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so there was basically a large grant of 14 billion that just went through in January, and 10 billion of that went to the core developer MetalX to build this out. So we're working on this technology. It's not just the AVM, but everything, right? The WebAuth Wallet, the exchange, loan, all of the DeFi stuff that powers Proton that people are using. And then there was a 4 billion grant that was broke down into 3 tranches. One is marketing, one is DApp development, and one is infrastructure. And the infrastructure is kind of what you hinted at earlier, was like, as the BPs are building out, having more robust systems, having better history nodes, having better APIs, things like that. That's like the infrastructure grant. So it's also there too that in an extreme time, right, when the market's really down, the miners are really hurting, they could also apply for additional funding by kind of showing some of their receipts and what they ROI. The consortium can work together to help keep BPs at the tail end, still in the game. And on the DApp development side, one of the things that we saw when we built the WPS was the WPS is a smaller grant that was initiated from the beginning, and part of the inflation would go into would go towards the consortium members, and the consortium members would donate this back into a pot, and that would become something called worker proposal system. And it was pretty small. It was like 3 to 4 grand. A couple times a year we would grant them out, and it didn't really make a huge impact. So one of the things that I had proposed was creating a larger war chest, recognizing that a lot of the WPS grants were not for open source tech for Proton proper, and they were more closed source or different types of dApps that people were building, but still bring value to the network, but maybe isn't what the original WPS was aligned for. And so in doing that, we've had a ton, and we had, even before the proposal, we had a ton of support for this, because we have all types of NFT platforms and security platforms and social media platforms, a decentralized eBay, all types of stuff. And they were asking for funding, and the WPS was this little dinky $3,000 a couple times a year. wasn't gonna cut it, right? And so in creating this and breaking it down, the DApp fund can also be for, and we encourage it for, open source development. If someone wanted to build a new wallet or something like that, we encourage that. And that can also come out of the WPS, even though it's much smaller. We're debating what we do with that now. If we keep that, or if we dissolve that, maybe lower the consortium pay or something like that. But yeah, we've been talking about that. And yeah, it's been great, because since we've created this, we recently put up a link on GitHub where you can fork it and you can fill out the information, apply for your own grant. And we've had some great grant applicants. We just did our very first grant, which was actually a media grant to a guy known as B Sprouts on Twitter, who does a bunch of really cool AI art and video editing, and he's going to be doing content about Proton. But that was the first grant that went out, and it's not limited to dApp development, like when I mentioned B Sprouts, you could be a YouTuber, you could be a writer, and you could apply for a grant. But then also we do want to encourage all these really cool dApps to kind of grow and to build with us. And one of the things that we're thinking about too is for the larger grants that we ask that we're trying to come up with a formula that we can ask the grant recipients, well, how, if this were to go over a certain size and you were to come back for more grants, how would you continue to help grow the network beyond just users, but are you charging fees that you could eventually put something back into the consortium, the committee WPS? Could you pay back into the pot over time, right? And we can support you in those early days. That's something that's really cool, and we're trying to figure that out now. But in talking to some of the larger grant recipients, we've gotten a lot of traction. I think that's part of the DAO vision that I think is really awesome, right? In the past, you would kind of struggle, bootstrap, you'd go raise funds in like equity and venture funding. And now in the Web3 world, there's a lot of grants out there, right? There's a lot of opportunities to build in different, and I think in the early days, you have, I'll just be blunt and say it, you have a lot of, grant warriors that are just hopping between chains. They're not actually they're just trying to get these like quick bucks. But then in the future, you're going to have much more loyalty. You're going to have use cases and target and like niches start to play out. And then I think that's where the grants are going to become more and more powerful. But yeah, we're still in these early days, I think, where you do have a lot of grant warriors. But then I can tell you that majority of the stuff that we've reviewed in Proton is really great. And a lot of these applicants were here long before this program existed. So it feels good to know that there's a big community around it. But yeah, the future is definitely DAO driven, and we recognize right now we have 4% inflation, but especially even with the change in when we go to AVM, we may need less fees, right? It may not cost as much to operate as it did before when there was all this overhead of data centers and so forth. But yeah, we're really excited to make the change because it's going to really open up the whole community that where literally everyone in the community can now be a block producer where they couldn't before.
Yep. No, I'm frankly just blown away by your commitment to decentralization and making everything about Proton accessible to users, accessible to people who want to run nodes, accessible to builders. This is really cool. And I know you keep saying it's early days, but I'm still pretty impressed with what you've accomplished and what you're planning to do. I've got about 100 more questions. I want to leave some time for questions from the audience here as well. Let me just ask one more because I thought it was interesting. I read that Proton has an identity layer that's part of the protocol. And I think you hinted at it before by saying that users can have human readable identities on chain and that they can apply for resources associated with that chain ID. Is there more to, or I mean, did I summarize that correctly or did I get it wrong? Is there more to it?
Yeah, no, you got it right. There's more to it too, but that was good. Yeah, so the idea is that we wanted to build a lot of the kind of frameworks for compliance tooling in right from the beginning, because we recognized, in 2020 when we were building it, we want to build a blockchain network, a layer one that can integrate with traditional finance, but can also work in the Web3 world, but stay compliant. And we saw this was a big problem because at that time, we were only about 3 years into kind of the origins of DeFi, right? Ethereum launched in 2016. By 2017, you have Maker. Maybe by late 2017, Compound, or I forgot when Compound came around. It was around that time, a little bit after Maker. And then you have all these other platforms, right? Like Curve and different things that are appearing around stablecoins, Uniswap, so forth. And it's very cool. But one of the things that we recognized as we were building MetalPay was, wow, we're going through a lot of license, like to do this right and to be licensed and to actually, the kind of parts of the advent of Web3 or, crypto in general, where we don't have to follow the, blockchain doesn't have to follow laws. And certainly blockchain definitely disintermediates a lot of things, but it doesn't change the fact that there are real people behind it and there still are real laws in place. And now in 2023, we're definitely hitting that point where it's like the advent of innovation and regulation, right? And I don't think that regulation has to be this stifling thing, but unfortunately, we might feel that stifling energy for a little bit because certain players really abused it, right? And some players didn't even mean to abuse it. They were just, I guess what's the phrase? Break things and ask for forgiveness later or whatever, right? And I think some were just rapidly innovating. But in doing so, we were looking at the DeFi world because that's where we wanted to go. We built MetalPay on a centralized backend, but the goal is to really decentralize everything. That MetalPay could become this decentralized vision. The trading, right? I didn't, we actually at one point at MetalX built a centralized exchange and then I scrapped it because there were many reasons why I wanted to scrap it. But one of the big reasons was I don't like the whole centralized trading engine. I don't like that it can go down. I don't like that, we could say, oh, next week this is going offline for maintenance, right? I love the idea that I love how Uniswap has just been nonstop 24/7, but then I hate how Uniswap has MEV. I hate how it has, you know, um, there's no notion of who you're trading with. And that's kind of dangerous because I always thought, well, if I'm using Compound or Maker or Uniswap, how do I know I'm not buying coins from North Korean Lazarus hacker group or whatever? And those are coming from laundered, that came from a ransomware that was put onto a hospital that in a small community that damaged, like that's crazy. That you can't even, that's so awful. We don't really think about that. But, as we're building out MetalX and MetalPay, we had to do all that stuff. So I thought if we're building a blockchain that's going to replicate all these functions of centralized exchanges. And now MetalPay can run on this decentralized trading engine underneath the hood. It not only needs to have, no MEV, no gas fees, needs to be instant, super fast. It needs to function just like a regular exchange or lending platform. But we also need to have this notion of digital identity for consumer and for business. And then those businesses building around it can use those notions of identity to not only keep their customers safe, but also to keep things compliant. And in the future, I predict there will be more explosions. And now, with the explosion of FTX last year, people are realizing, wow, everything that guy was saying was a load of BS. He had private keys on an AWS server titled useme.txt or something, right? Like it was all smoke and mirrors and it was all BS. And same thing for the security goes for the compliance. There was no compliance. It was clearly it was all smoke and mirrors. So with Proton, we recognize that this is where things are going to go. Not only do they need to be transparent in the open, but they also need to be like rules on a chain, right? And so we really need to be able to prove them. And then also, not only do we want to build a blockchain that has, the compliance tooling for the future, but like, what if you lost your keys? How do you create a recovery system around private keys? Well, obviously identity, right? And if you're going to bring your grandmother on, your grandfather on, your cousin who's not technical or something, you want to be able to have them feel good. You want them not to lose all their crypto, not get hacked, not get scammed, not have some sort of regulatory or tax issues or something like that. So building out all this tooling, the identity piece is something that's really important to us. Right now, it's still in kind of an MVP phase. We're about to open it up. The way that it works is it uses the domain system on Proton. So there's a .kyc and .kyb domain. Well, the KYB is not in use yet, but .kyc, and that can be issued by the consortium. So essentially, fintechs can come in, banks can come in, and you could be Citibank or Bank of America or MetalX or Coinbase or Kraken .kyc or .kyb, and then you can start issuing these identities. Now, these identities are only as valid as the issuing, authority, right? And so right now you have MetalX under Metal.kyc, but soon you'll see other banks and fintechs issuing as well. And we're going to open up our standard of the data storage. So right now, all that's stored on the MetalX backend. If you do a KYC with us, we securely store those records. We have our own BSA AML program. We monitor those records. And we can see when you log in that you have that KYC stamp that we've already verified you, which we can match with a backend record. In the future, will have a whole system whereby the user can store the data encrypted on their phone, so they don't have to retype everything out every time. And then when they do the biometric or the video, that's a separate like liveness check, but it will be much more akin to kind of like the Apple Face ID or the Touch on Samsung or something like that. And you might still do a video, but now you're no longer typing all this stuff out. It's stored on your device. And then we want to build out all that tooling as well. And that's something that that MetalX will sell at some point. Software as a service is that compliance dashboard around the back end. But of course, these companies will need to do their own compliance. They'll need to receive the documents from the users. You can't just trust that, oh, Metal did this KYC, so it's good. You need to receive the documents directly from the user. So storing that information on your device, passing it over on your device, and then getting that stamp is really powerful in the future because, I don't know if some of you are familiar, but like when you're logging into some of these centralized exchanges, it takes minutes. It's crazy. It's like, move this slider. Here's a text code. Here's an email. Here's a link. It's like, you know what? I don't want to do any of that. How about I have a UV key or a Face ID and I'll slide right in and I'll have even better security, right? And so that's the vision with WebAuth, right? Is that you just tap it, slide right in, you'll have better security. And the name WebAuth, it's web authentication. The idea is that basically we want to do away with the OTP, the one-time passcode, and the multi-factor authentication that is using OTP. So in the old world or the current world, we're using OTP where we use Google Authenticator or Authy or Duo, and we set up a centralized MFA. It requests a code. We open an app. We type this code for 60 or 90 seconds. It'll change every time. It'll rotate every time, right? That's pretty bad if you think about it, because even though it's like semi-secure, could you be phished in 90 seconds? Could you be phished in 60 seconds? That's the question we're asking. And the answer is yes, right? Unlikely, but yes. So with WebAuth, the idea is that there's no time to be hacked. There is a high level of entropy, and there's no rotating pass one-time passcode, right? So with WebAuth, in the future, you're just signing with a key. Either you have the key to sign, or you don't. But there's no way that you could, tell someone over the phone or a robot that's phishing you could type that information in. And after overspending over a decade in crypto, some people may say, I've never seen anyone get hacked with the OTP. I have. I've seen it happen, and people are like, I can't believe it. But I could tell you stories where, hackers literally showed up at a crypto exchange's dumpster and behind their building, went through, taped together pieces of paper, took over the web host, put a fake web host on the front end, similar to the Badger hack, and people logged into it. They thought they were typing their OTPs into the front of this exchange, and it was just passed right through the back end where they drained all these accounts, right? That was a long time ago. But it does happen in the future. We want to eliminate OTP codes with something like WebAuth. You could use Face ID, and then you could link in all of your crypto wallets. That's kind of the vision.
Well, that makes a lot of sense to me. It's like today's crypto is kind of irrational speculation. Everyone's hoping that the chain that they're associated with is going to do what's right in the future. And I feel like you're building for that future. You're putting everything in place for success, down the road. So the enterprise can look and say, yeah, this is obviously decentralized, and I can do business here without having to worry about the North Korean hackers, right? You're building in accessibility so that the rest of the world, when this becomes part of their life, it's easy for them, and it fits the metaphors that they understand. I think everything you said is extremely cool, extremely powerful, and it's great to hear a blockchain project focused on these things today.
Thanks. Same back at you and what you're doing with XDC and Zinfin. MetalX, as we're looking to partner and have new listings and partnerships and other blockchains that we can integrate with, we have a multi-blockchain vision. So we don't, I don't, nor the team at MetalX believes that there's any one blockchain is the answer. Of course we love Bitcoin. Of course we love Proton. We like XDC, but we're a multi-chain world. And in order for this to succeed, it's going to come down to a lot of different teams and technologies working together, sharing that same vision, and building something that's going to be really valuable for the users. right? We can't all do everything alone, right? So it's really great to be partnered with you guys and, you know, aligned with other players in the space that see the same things that we're seeing about banking, payments, compliance. And that doesn't sound sexy, but to the end user, it will be sexy, because what it will be is a seamless, awesome experience that's not wonky. You don't get hacked. You don't have to worry about these issues. In the future, you know, the experience of Coinbase and MetalPay and all of these apps are going to be blockchain under the hood, right? And each blockchain is going to have its own specialty for doing this stuff.
Yep. Nope. I agree. Sexy gets you FTX. That's not what anybody wants. Let's take a few minutes and get some questions from the audience. If anybody has any, this would be a great time. Go ahead and make a request to speak, and we'll let you up. And while we wait for that, Marshall, are you going to be at Consensus later this month down in Austin, Texas?
I am, yeah. We're Arena's going to be there as well. She has a panel with Eleanor Tourette from Fox Business. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be great. Will you be there?
Yeah, we'll be there. We're going to have a booth there. Some people from the foundation will be there. People from XDC Community will be there. So looking forward to it. I'm going to do a little presentation at the Protocol Pavilion, but we'll have to sync up while we're down there.
Likewise, yeah, definitely. We'll get some dinner or something. Yeah, it's crazy. I used to go every year when Consensus was in Manhattan, in New York. I used to go every year for Consensus. It was great. And then we do the Money 2020. And then it was like around the time that COVID hit, maybe it was 2019 or 2020, they started doing the Austin one. And I haven't been out yet, so I'm excited to go.
Fantastic. Yeah, likewise. All right. I've got no requests from the audience here. This is
Everybody
a good chance.
knows.
Everybody knows, right? It was such a thorough explanation of how Proton Network functions that nobody needs to ask any questions.
Everybody's like, I'm all set. Claiming my farming rewards, borrowing and lending. Yeah. Cool.
All right.
Well, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much, John, the XDC
Yeah,
team and XDC community. It's really, really great to be partnered with you guys, and love the vision of compliance and payments and everything you guys are doing. It's very cool.
Yep, 100% agree. Thank you very much for your time. It was fantastic learning more about Metallica, about Metal blockchain, about Proton Network, everything. So look forward to more of this in the future.
Likewise. Cheers, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks, John. Thanks, everyone. See ya.